I'm feeling a little monsty today.
Excuse me?
You know, like a little bit monstrous, monster-esque, like a monster.
You shouldn't say it like that here. That makes it sound like you're gonna go around reaching into eggs later.
What? No, of course.
Which, to be fair, most people are alright with as long as you remember to wear rubber gloves.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsties of all ages, Monster Hunter is such a wild and varied franchise with all the different styles of hunting between the different generations of the main game, to the puzzle games that you'll find only if you dig really deep, all the way to Monster Hunter Stories, a game focused more around the actual, story than any other Monster Hunter series that you will find. The second game, Wings of Ruin, came out a couple of years ago to pretty massive success. Lots of people realized just how much they enjoyed the quaint beauty of it as a change of pace from the gameplay in the main series Monster Hunter and even the world building too, and even past that, a ton of people actually played Monster Hunter Stories 2 that had never played any other Monster Hunter game before, just because the actual gameplay appealed to them more than the main series did. And the thing is, a lot more people played Monster Hunter Stories 2 than the first game, or at least that was the case, because now the game is being remastered and released on Steam, Nintendo Switch, and PlayStation 4 on June 13th of this year. And the lovely folks over at Capcom have sent us over a copy to play ahead of time. So today is going to simply be my first impressions on the Stories remaster, as someone who has had a playthrough of the original game years ago, and someone who spent probably way too much time in Stories 2 as well. First things first, let's talk about what has changed. For the people who are already familiar with the first game, this remaster is fully voiced not just in the Monster Hunter language like the original was, but also in both Japanese and English. And the voice acting is absolutely incredible, honestly. My personal favorite is the Chief. The delivery of his rhyming lines is just so goddamn good every single time. Every time I hear him speak, I just stop and listen and I let it play. I will never skip his lines.
But a monster's life from nature's view is what sustains us, me and you. Have you walked among the rolling hills and stopped to sniff the daffodils? The industrious bugs of every sort are to these flowers by duty brought. The nectar that they gather there is then with others quickly shared. Upon these creatures we rely. Our need of them we can't deny.
Past that, even from the first time that you reach the main menu of the game, there is a ton of new content available inside of the museum section, which is quite simply an art and music gallery for the game that is just honestly incredible. It's generally stuff I've been asked not to share too much of for obvious reasons, so I'll only be sharing a couple here, but there's concept art that went unused or unshared as well, including things that were just unreleased at all in any other place. And a lot of them have little developer comments on them too, which are always just really cool for getting a bit of a peek under the hood, so to say, and see their actual thoughts as they were making it and seeing the way that they worked out the process. The next big thing that I found pretty early on is that there is just a ton more character creation options in this game than the original, including the ability to straight up use parts of existing characters in the world and the story. For example, my character in this early preview was literally just Child Dan, because I found it really funny to look exactly like Dan and be called Dan and basically just pretend that I'm Dan's son, Dan Jr., who he keeps pretending is just some random child from the village that he has no connection to because he needs to avoid accusations of nepotism. Okay, that aside, I just love that that's the thing. The other main thing of note here, I haven't reached it yet in my own playtime. It just is relatively endgame stuff as far as the game works, but the original Stories had a number of post-release title updates quite similar to what Stories 2 got, but these updates were never released in the version of the game that came to the West, so we never got to engage with these ourselves over on this side of the world. The remaster, however, comes loaded with all of the updates the original game got from the get-go, so even for those who did play a load of the original game, will have a lot of things to experience in this actual remaster, gameplay-wise at the very least, even on top of the extra immersion from the extra voice options and the bonus fun that the museum has to offer. Outside of that, probably the best bits so far of difference are that visually, the game is still just fantastic. The style holds up extremely well, and it's all just rendered in higher quality than it was before, more pixels, more frames per second as well, which is nice, and it's just very quaint and lovely, really, especially the cutscenes, which just have no business being as high quality and beautiful as they honestly are. Like, you will struggle to find better looking Monster Hunter characters and monsters than you will in these cutscenes, which is just awesome to me. That's most of the new stuff then, so now I'll just be talking about the game in general. You may have noticed that I'm only using particularly early game footage for the most part, and that's quite simply because this game is about the journey more than the gameplay, and so for anyone who hasn't played the first Stories, I want to keep it as spoiler free as possible while still getting my points across. On which note, the story itself is great. Definitely just improved by the addition of more language voice options for the game too. It helps with the immersion, at least in my opinion, but even that aside, this is just one of the deepest Monster Hunter stories ever told, pun intended. The vast majority of the game is based around the story itself and where it will take you, and it really can just sort of pull you in because of that. With, yes, sure, somewhat predictable twists, but twists nonetheless. Lovable characters with a surprising amount of personality around every single one of them. The developer comments that you can see in the museum tells that they actually had a lot of background ideas for these characters that were never actually shared, and that sort of was expressed in the way that these characters acted, the way that their personalities worked. Like Roberto, for example, actually they had a ton of background made for him that just sort of influenced the way that he literally moves as he talks, and it's not stuff that ever actually comes up in the game. And there's also characters like Dan, or his son, Dan Jr. Sorry, I still absolutely find this absolutely hilarious. It's a story of friendship and family above all else, and while you could definitely say that this game has a more childish nature to it than mainline Monster Hunter, because it does, honestly, that is not a bad thing, at least in my opinion. It just depends what kind of game you're looking to play, because this game is relaxing as all hell. This is genuinely the best kind of Monster Hunter to boot up when you just want a chill session in the world of Monster Hunter. There's no better way to just immerse yourself in the franchise than with stories, in my opinion. So far, the game has just run perfectly for me as well as far as performance. No hiccups at all. The best endorsement that I could possibly give the remaster past that is just that it simply feels like the original version of the game, but smoother in so many different ways. Next up, the other big major thing to talk about then is the combat of the game. Compared to the sequel, the combat in the original Monster Hunter stories and in the remaster is a fair bit simpler. There is a lot of nuance and depth that was added to the systems for the second game, even things like just having more weapons to play with. But in the first game, it comes down mostly to the rock, paper, scissors system of different attack types fighting against each other. One of them comes ahead over another in a cycle. Elemental damage were applicable as well, and then just managing the kinship meter through successful head-to-heads and choosing whether to spend your kinship power on weapon skills, monster skills, or the full-on kinship attacks, which are just as good as they've always been. Aptonoth is the goat, I swear. The weak points of this combat system are oftentimes your own AI partner won't use correct attack types for the situation, even if you, the player, do know what you should be doing. But at least with Monstie specifically, this is somewhat solved by just bringing the right Monstie to the right fight, because each Monstie has their own attack patterns and their own forcible skills that could also fall under one of these types. Point being, the combat system is relatively simple, sure, but it is deep enough to be engaging and consistent for people who just enjoy the vibe of the game as a whole. Everything in the game is learnable through multiple attempts into making it easy once you've worked out the actual patterns, and that is honestly just a great representation of the way that the main series game's best monsters work, in my opinion too. Overall, just like the story, the combat is meant to create a just very relaxing vibe, rather than trying to stress you out in any way. This is the quaint creature collector of the Monster Hunter franchise, and especially if you're someone who has played Wings of Ruin but not the first game, you honestly owe it to yourself to check this out, because there are plenty of people who still hold that they believe the first game was better than the second, and this remaster is a perfect time to experience it for yourself. That said, there's plenty of stuff for people who've played the base game too, and that's what makes this truly quite solid in my opinion. To sum up my thoughts, really, the remaster is just a straight up improvement over the original, as well as being released on more platforms and in higher quality. There are a number of strong additions to the game over the base version that we used to have as well, and it's also just sort of the perfect time for an injection of Monster Hunter enjoyment while we're waiting for Wilds, honestly. And one final note that I would be remiss not to mention, this isn't being sold for like full AAA video game price at all. This is relatively quite cheap in the modern age of gaming, so you should probably take that into consideration when you think about whether you want this game or not. I don't want to tell people what to do with their money, but I will say that I think you'd be hard pressed to find yourself regretting buying and playing this game unless you do that just to try and spite me and prove me wrong here. I hope you've all enjoyed this, basically just my own first impressions and opinions from the first few hours of playing the remaster of Monster Hunter Stories. Once again, big appreciation for the early preview provided to us by Capcom themselves, and I cannot wait to see what you all feel about the game too once you get your own hands on with it in just a few weeks. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.